This is HFO's Multifamily Marketwatch, presented by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, a contractor specializing in siding and exterior envelopes, delivering exceptional quality and service for over 30 years. By Aprio, combining DeLapp's Pacific Northwest experience with Aprio's global resources to offer unparalleled tax, wealth management, and advisory services for real estate owners. And by Kennedy Restoration, helping residential and business owners recover from fire, water, mold, and storm damage.
Welcome back to Multifamily Market Watch. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Back with us today, we have Scott Bailey. He's a Clark County, Vancouver, Washington economist. Thanks for coming back to speak with our audience again.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Always great to get your kind of take on what's going on across the river. So let's just jump right into kind of we've heard a lot of stories about the economic split between Vancouver, Clark County, Washington, Multnomah County, and Portland. Is it as wide of a split as we think? What is as an economist looking at that, where do you fall on that?
Well, it was a wide split for 2 years ago, say. But
coming out of COVID.
And the same thing. So if we go a little bit further back, coming out of the Great Recession, Clark County was just gangbusters, but so was Portland, and so was Seattle. So the Northwest was doing really well, and COVID hits, and it's not an economic recession. It's a virus, and yes, it shook some things up. But then in the recovery, Clark County took off again until about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And then the last 2 years, employment growth has maybe been 0.5%, when normally like 2% is kind of a slow year. So things have definitely slowed down there for, I think, a number of reasons. The county's still part of the Portland metro area.
So I know we've heard a lot over the last few years about the difference between Clark County, Washington, and Vancouver's growth versus kind of the Oregon, Multnomah County, Portland. As the economist looking at the data, is that a huge divide still, or is that narrowing? How do you look at it from where we stand today in early part of 2026?
Right. Well, certainly coming out of COVID, there was a pretty big contrast. And to go back a few years, the recovery from the Great Recession was really pretty strong in the Northwest, and especially strong in Clark County, stronger than Portland Metro as a whole. But suburban counties will almost always grow faster than the overall.
Yes.
But about 2 years ago, the employment growth in Clark County really leveled off. The last 2 years, it's been about half a percent a year. So it recovered really well and then stopped in a sense in terms of the job market.
Join the HFO community and get weekly multifamily intel. Click to subscribe.
What do you attribute? I mean, it's still doing relatively better than like Multnomah County, where we probably still haven't recovered. But where do you contribute this slowdown? Is it tied to Seattle? Is it tied to Pacific Northwest as a whole?
I think it's probably a number, like everything else.
Right.
It's a number of things. The national stuff going on is, with immigration, with tariffs, and just the uncertainty has probably impacted things. Nationally, we're seeing, that big sucking sound you hear is all the investment going into AI and not going into other productive things. So the job cuts happening now at places like Microsoft and Oracle are because we're investing our money here, not in things that create jobs and expand our headcount. So I think that's part of it. And Clark County is part of the Portland metro area, and you can't diverge that much from the overall area. We still have, it used to be almost a third of the workforce commuting to Portland every day. It's probably down now to about more like the low 20s.
Okay. So you've got more people staying in Clark County, working in Clark County.
Right. And, the working at home thing was an impact as well. But it's still a substantial number. We're the 7th largest county in Oregon paying the income tax. So if you live in Clark County and work in Portland, you pay the income tax.
Right.
So there's still, and then the reverse commute as well is not small. So,
and you said again, you started seeing signs of this a couple years ago.
Right.
Is it leveling off now? Are we still? I mean, is the job growth? Do you think it'll come around, come back up in 26, 27, or a lot of it depends on what happens nationally?
I think nationally, and I don't know if we're headed for a recession. There's a lot of speculation around that, but I mean, there's certainly some clouds on the horizon.
Right.
With the war, with is AI a bubble? Yeah, all that kind of thing. So. One of the strong points, though, in Clark County remains I think the fastest growing industry coming out of COVID was professional services. So engineering services, R&D, computer systems design, management consulting, all grew. And our last certain job count from a couple months ago, we're still growing quite a bit over the year.
And that was not what used to drive the Clark County, Clark County, Washington economy.
Right.
That was never, it was always, we always thought of it as like kind of the manufacturing.
The blue collar.
Yes.
Yeah, that was when I started there decades ago. It was kind of the blue collar place. And it really changed, 15 years ago when we got in a couple of headquarters. Peace Health moved their headquarters there. A couple of others moved in, and we saw the growth more of not software per se, but that associated with the software side of things, all start to expand there. And so that kind of shift. And manufacturing had a pretty good recovery all through the teens. COVID hit. And then it recovered again. But in the last 2 years, it's been trickling down, kind of like nationally, following the national trend. And I'm sure the tariffs are not helping. Even if you're selling domestically, if you're buying.
Right.
Yeah.
And we are so tied with the location with, our access to, the Asian markets from importing and exporting. I think we take a big brunt of some of these hits. So in terms of what do you see other industries still continuing to expand as financial services has come back? And you think that some of that's tied to the lack, kind of the different tax structure Oregon has versus Washington?
I don't think that plays a huge role on the industry level.
Okay.
I think if firms are locating here, they locate to the Portland metro area.
Right.
And then they go, okay, this is where we want to be, great workforce. Yeah. Do we want to be here? Do we want to here? And it's different by company.
Okay.
So there's, I don't know that plays that much of an impact. If you're a high, if somebody's worried about paying the income tax, then that's going to tilt it over there.
Yeah, as we used to always joke around, we'd have retirees moving to Vancouver for lack of income tax. Or again, it was more of the blue collar side, and that's kind of changed over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Now they've gotten more, services and employment based within the
really
city.
The retiree thing is
small.
All the stories about businesses fleeing to Clark County, that's always been overstated. There's always movement going both ways.
And then I know it's interesting. Do you think how big of a tie is Clark County to Seattle, to what happens in Seattle driving the state? Or is it, again, because of the, proximity, it's part of the Portland metropolitan area? I mean, is that because, Seattle's had its own, hardships as well?
Yeah, I think the tie to Seattle comes through the public budgets. So if Seattle isn't doing well, then state revenues aren't doing well.
And that's where.
And that flows down through social services and education and that kind of a thing. And then, of course, anything that happens at the legislature things are different in Olympia than Salem, and you never know which way that's going.
I know. Sometimes they're similar, sometimes they're not. It's kind of changing.
And sometimes positive, and sometimes,
Which is, again, I think some of the uncertainty you talked about, just the uncertainty with what's going to pass through, especially on the housing side.
Right.
Are we going to, are they really serious about trying to bring housing? Are they not? What does that look like in operating in these various states?
Yeah.
Which has made it very tough. So.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And the legislators tend to be deliberative, and that's, in some ways a good thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes frustrating.
Right. And in looking forward, I mean, what do you see is still the positive drivers for Clark County in Washington? And, in comparison, is it just continue kind of the path where maybe we start seeing some job growth, some population growth, or what when you're doing the pitch on why Clark County in the next 5 years, what are you saying?
Well, good bones, and pretty good local government. And really good partnerships in terms of the public-private kind of partnerships with the Economic Development Council, and the workforce development, the Wazoo campus and Clark College. And Clark just opened up a new manufacturing Clark College center in Ridgefield. That's I haven't been there, but I've heard it's pretty cool.
And have you seen? I mean, are they more because you look at their success with some of their public-private partnerships,
right,
and able to get projects through as opposed to looking at some of the outlying other areas around there. They just seem much more, I want to say, I don't know, forward-thinking but able to get things done. Is that because you think they're smaller? Do you think it's been a change?
So it's hard to. I don't have a very good comparison. I think it's probably a bit easier in Clark County, but you talk to, and I had a conversation yesterday with somebody over there, and the frustration at times with the permitting process,
right.
And not so much the cost, but the duration. And I could have a revenue stream right now, but I have to wait because they didn't check a box, and so we have to start all. That whole frustrating thing. That's kind of universal, I think, but it's better or worse in some areas than the other.
They just seem to be able to get some projects through. Again, some bigger projects. Again, that also could just be a factor of having more land available and more of those, sites that may make sense for that. But you look up there and you see some more cranes and things like that, which is positive, I think.
And the waterfront development has been huge.
Right.
And that's starting to slow down a bit. I mean, it's being built out, so there's still being more construction there, but it's pretty exciting to go down there. It's really a whole new look for Vancouver, and then the connecting trails that they're doing all along the Columbia. There's a lot of positives there.
Right, and then you have some other bigger developments more to towards Camas and Washougal. There's a rock quarry spot, and those are kind of in there, just starting, but you can see the vision of where that could go.
Yeah, exactly.
So, which I think is positive compared to a lot of other locales around the area.
Now, the population growth has been slowing, and the same reasons it's slowing nationally. So, if you look at births and deaths compared with 15 years ago, births are up a couple of %. And deaths are up like 70% because of demographics, the aging population, and the drop in fertility rate is universal. I mean, it's all over the world.
So the only way we're going to get growth with that is immigration. Right.
And this last year, the last data we have available was the lowest in-migration rates in any kind of non-recession period over the last 25 years. So that's slowed down. And I think that's part of the whole, we've read about the labor market nationally about no job switching or a big drop in job switching. Well, that carries over to in-migration because the reason most people move is—
the job's behind it or something, yes.
Yeah.
So if we see, I mean, again, like you brought up, it's got good bones. I think, I think the whole Portland area has good bones. It's just a matter now if we can I don't know if we'll get back to the the raw days of coming out of the Great Recession where we just had expansive growth, but get back to some positive momentum.
Yeah.
I still think if you have a long-term horizon, there's a lot of positives still over here.
So, and housing is a big part of that.
Yes.
I just pulled it's preliminary for the calendar year 2025, and housing is there was a slight uptick in single family, but lower in multifam. And, we had a record year in 2021, with a lot of areas, and it's dropped quite a bit from that.
And that may not come back for a while because just of the economics of it, between interest rates, the costs, the return you're able to get.
I mean, that's the crazy thing. If you look at, I teach Economics 101. Oh, supply and demand. Prices up, supply should rise.
Right.
Except no.
Right.
For all sorts of reasons. So that remains a huge challenge really everywhere.
Which then puts more pressure on the affordability component. And it's just this, and then, how do you get new jobs coming in or new companies coming in if they perceive a housing affordability issue for their potential workers? Right. And then it just makes it tougher and tougher to compete. And I think the whole West Coast is kind of discovering now we are having to compete. People aren't just coming because we're on the West Coast. We have to compete with other regions. And affordability is a big component of where people want to end up.
Yeah. One of the positives also for Clark County is that, median household income matches the state of Washington and higher than the Portland median. Poverty is substantially lower.
Okay.
So, and we don't have the super rich at the top in those kind of numbers. So it's kind of
compressed in a tighter
in the middle. And on the other hand, because housing has been going up so much around affordability, you still have roughly half of renters who are income distressed. And even though they might not be officially poor, the amount of food, and this is, I think, really all over, the amount of food going out in terms of food pantries has gone up enormously. The demand is just high because, wages just haven't been keeping up.
That's what we have. Those they're feeling the inflation and cost of goods. That's trickling down for sure. And that's
So that's there's probably some lessons there for landlords going forward in terms of how much can you squeeze? Not much, or people are going to be pushed out.
Well, that's what we talk about in the affordability component of if there's only on a supply demand. If there's no supply, you've got more demand, but there's a limit. If you don't get some kind of wage inflation, there's a limit to what you can what you can charge, and it's like kind of the ever circle of how do we address that issue. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak to the audience again. It's always great to hear your perspective on what's going on in Clark County, and we'll see you again next time on Multifamily Market Watch. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Scott. That was great.
Yep. Take care.
HFO's entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making us the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Like and subscribe to Multifamily Market Watch videos on YouTube, articles on LinkedIn, and podcasts on all major streaming markets. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information. HFO is a partner of the Global Real Estate Advisor Network.
Love the insights? Tap the like button and click subscribe. It helps us bring more multifamily news straight to you.